in the university-wide initiative, which is the Public Interest Technology University Network, or PIT-UN. And Professor Yu, who is the John H. Chestnut Professor of Law, Communication, and Computer and Information Science, as well as the founding director of Penn Center for Technology, Innovation, and Competition, is Penn's PIT-UN representative. So now I'm going to hand him the floor so he can speak about his critical involvement in PIT-UN and also introduce our speakers for today. So Professor Yu, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Kelsey, and thanks to all the students at PIT-UN, Pitt at Penn for being such great partners in this really important endeavor. It's funny, we joined this wonderful organization called the Public Interest Technology University Network this year, but it actually picked up on things that were already ongoing, which is very much part of the Penn experience, which is, as you all know, there's a tremendous emphasis on interdisciplinary education, which can mean a lot of different, it covers a lot of different areas, but very specifically, the fact that I'm a professor of law and communication and computer science not only means that I have ADHD, but it also means that it's based on a commitment of bringing together different perspectives that have traditionally been siloed to a much too great an extent. So there used to be an old joke, you used to be able to clear out a room of technologists by talking about politics or money. And just, that a lot of the technologists, particularly the engineers, would just love to work on their technologies, they're doing their bit and not worry about everything else. And I think there's sort of a mutual recognition going on right now, which is, one is, I think increasingly the technical community is recognizing they need to become more engaged in broader issues to pursue their interests, and maybe it started for very mundane things such as why do the entrepreneurs, the inventors keep losing control of their businesses, or trying to understand the broader dynamics, or how to deal with privacy regulation and bake it into the beginning instead of retrofitting it later, and all these different aspects. But on a much more fundamental level, the PIT-UN initiative recognizes that public policy needs technologists. It's not just the technologists working out, it's the need to draw them in. And that too many policy debates and conversations happen without technical expertise. Someone will mention a very fundamental concept, not even cutting edge, but a basic understanding. You'll have crickets chirping. And there's a lot of ways to make policy, but ignorance is not a good one. It's just not naturally lent itself that way. And so part of this has manifested itself at Penn already. We have a deep commitment, for example, as Professor Nankova knows, we have joint degree programs that where people are getting graduate level training in both law and engineering to try to breed and prepare a new type of professional that's really prepared to engage both these fields at a high level. And that is a project near and dear to my heart. And it's we've been reaching out to all the different technical disciplines to try to bring that out into a stronger degree. And we're really proud of all the things that we've accomplished there. And in addition, we have this organization where it's not just Penn, there's universities all over the country began to get into a dialogue, and there's this organization of 36 universities, and intentionally some of the best leading universities, but they're including community colleges and a whole different range to make sure that every student, no matter where they engage in the process, starts to get involved, have the opportunity to understand how to get more involved. And to me, this ties in very nicely with the ongoing Paideia program here, which is really trying to increase the civic engagement. When we started all these a few years ago, convincing people the need to increase civic engagement, it was something that people would generally nod at. They'd understand it's important, but maybe it was one of several priorities. I think in this day and age, it's become very apparent to every one of us that our entire society depends upon public engagement from every one of its citizens. It's not just something you leave to a certain group of people. That's a mutual, we create our own society, civil society, and recreate it every day, and we're all responsible for being part of that. And we abdicate that responsibility at our own risk. And so to me, the whole Paideia program is not just in the sciences and bringing them into public policy, but a much broader university level initiative to try to do this for all undergraduates and all students here at Penn. And I'm very proud to be at a university that's placing such a high priority in so many different ways at trying to draw these connections. What I would also tell you is these sorts of initiatives work best when they are connect not only at the administrative levels and the faculty levels, but also the student levels, because then you get a very rich community with deep levels of commitment, which is why we're here today to inaugurate this wonderful organization called Pitt at Penn. I think it's going to create wonderful opportunities. This is the first one to start to illustrate that. And we couldn't have, I can't imagine 4 better speakers to kick us off. I'll introduce them briefly. You have access to their bios in other places, but someone said, introductions, I can either repeat stuff you already know or try to ingratiate myself with the audience by showing that I know people. I choose the latter. And so Professor Allen and I have been colleagues for a very long time, and she is one of the most decorated privacy scholars, having been named to the President Obama's Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues, having been named, honored for her career contributions by the Electric Privacy Information Center as being one of the leaders. She is not only a law professor, but a brilliant philosopher, and brings together a fantastic perspective that is really been a novel voice in the space, bringing together perspectives that often aren't brought together in ways that I think have informed all of us. And I'm just delighted to have her here. Peter Bloom is the person who I met when I was studying a project I'm working on called One World Connected. Half the world is not online, and adoption rates are slowing. And if COVID has taught us nothing else, being online has become critical. I've met and learned about Peter's work through a project he leads called Rhizomatica. Rhizomatica is an innovative project in Oaxaca, rural Mexico, that is providing a brilliant new solution that is connecting people and is being rolled out across Mexico in ways that have posed some fascinating interlocks between the actual network and public policy that I think you've solved in ways that are quite unique. In addition, he hasn't constrained his work to there. He's actually done work in Nigeria as a development consultant. He's done he's currently in Ecuador and working in the Amazon. He was named MIT Technology Review Innovator, one of the Innovator Under 35 and the Foreign Policy's 100 Leading Global Thinkers lists. And he is actually even working here in the city of Philadelphia, ex-director of Juntos, the first organization in Philadelphia dedicated to organizing and defending human rights of Latino immigrants. So but fascinatingly, Peter comes at it from the other end, which is his BA is from urban studies and became involved in technology, not from that background, but from the other way, which is the other dimension, the reciprocal dimension that has to be here as well. Ani Nenkova is a associate professor of computer information science. And for those of you who don't know her, I know her best from a fascinating class she teaches called The Science of Data Ethics. Now, we often think about the ethics of data science. But the funny thing is, once you figure out what the ethical obligations are, how do you actually implement them? And that is fascinatingly understudied. She's been a leader within the engineering school about how to revamp the ethics considerations, and is probably as attuned as anyone on this faculty of the need to bring the type of considerations that go beyond the pure technology into front of mind, not as afterthoughts, but front of mind into every technologist as they design different products and do the great work that they do. Sanjay Udani is Vice President of Technology Policy at Verizon. He was a PhD graduate of computer science, and helped roll out the Fiber to the Home initiative that Fios did and Verizon did. Also was teaching as an adjunct professor here, and we used to get together regularly in those days and would enjoy that. He has done the kind of move that we're talking about here. He's a technologist that became involved in public policy. I think he's part of a great policy shop that understands the value and the importance of bringing in those technological voices. So he's got not only 12 patents to his name, but he's also got a deep involvement in policy issues and understanding how these two different worlds interlock. Delighted all of you are here to join us today. And with that, I hand it back to Kelsey and Sophie to get us started in our conversation.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Professor Yu. That was super helpful, and I hope everyone has a basic understanding of what Pitt UN is. If you have any more questions or you're looking to get more involved, I'm going to plug this again, but we have our interest form in the chat. Please fill it out. We love to grow our membership. So our first question for all the speakers, I'm just going to field it at you in alphabetical order, is just to give us a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis. Dr. Allen, could you please go first? Oh, I'm sorry. I think you're muted, Dr. Allen.
I'll start with the last 2 days, which are pretty typical for me. So yesterday morning, early in the morning, I led a workshop for the Board of Directors of the International Association of Privacy Professionals. This is a group that provides training and education for lawyers, technologists, anybody who works in the privacy space. And the people on the call were from Italy, Germany, someone called in from Hong Kong. And we talked about the intersection of race and privacy. They turned to me as an expert on privacy who happens also to be a woman of color to share with them my perspectives on privacy and race. And in preparing for the session, I actually ended up doing so much research on the topic that I decided, Christopher Yu, that my privacy law class for next semester is going to be called The Intersection of Privacy and Race. It's a big topic. And when I talk about race, I won't be talking about race narrowly to mean just Black people or Hispanics, Native Americans, but also what about minorities in China or minorities in other parts of the world. So it's going to be a broad course about the ways in which demographics of ethnicity, religion, culture, and what we call race impact either the privacy either in a positive way or in a negative way. So I did that workshop and that was very exciting. Then yesterday afternoon, I had been invited to give a major lecture for my undergraduate college, which is called New College. It's located in Sarasota, Florida. It's a small college. They have a lecture series. As a distinguished alum, I was asked to speak, and the topic was about privacy and accountability in relation to COVID-19. And I started off my talk with by talking about a very troubling article I'd read in the New Yorker called Pandemic Shaming, all about how people around the world are facing being condemned, censured, et cetera, in social media and otherwise online because of their because of their COVID status or how they've behaved in relationship to their COVID status. So that was a very interesting talk for me. Again, the research I put into preparing for talks and workshops is often has payoff for my teaching, my mentorship, and my overall scholarship. Then this morning, I met with the acting executive director of EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center in DC. I'm the chair of the board, and we're in the middle of a search for our new executive director. If you know anybody who'd like to be the executive director of a Washington, DC think tank around privacy issues, let me know. But we're working with Russell Reynolds, which is a major management consulting firm, to find our new director. That's very exciting. And here I am on this call, helping to hopefully to mentor and excite young folks at Penn to pursue careers in technology and the humanities.
Wow, thank you very much. It sounds like you've had a very busy couple of days. That's extremely exciting. Up next is Mr. Bloom. If you could just give us a day-to-day, what your job looks like.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Yeah, my day-to-day is pretty varied. I mean, I basically run a nonprofit organization that works in technology in places where there's no connectivity. So a lot of my job at this point is managing staff, somehow figuring out what our projects are going to be. We have different teams of people in different parts of the world. We have a team in Mexico, we have a team in Brazil, and I'm in Ecuador this year, starting to do work here as well in the Amazon, as Professor Yu said. So some part of my day is spent talking to all the people that work on this project, some 20 plus people, and really trying to figure out how we help folks who are not connected get connected. And get connected in ways that are culturally and sort of situationally appropriate for them. So in Mexico, we run like a small federated cellular network that's owned and operated by indigenous communities. In Brazil, we're working with a lot of indigenous communities in the Amazon jungle and also here in Ecuador who are using HF radio and other technologies to stay in touch. Due to COVID, obviously a lot of time on the computer, just like the rest of us. But yeah, I've had the chance to go and do some workshops as well in the Amazon recently, which was really interesting with all the PPE on and all of that. It's quite a new experience. So yeah, there's just kind of this like inside outside aspect to the work of planning, fundraising. That's a huge part of our work because as a not-for-profit, we're constantly looking for ways to fund what we're doing and provide solutions. So also trying to develop technology as a nonprofit is quite a challenge sometimes. and then also trying to do the on-the-ground work and not lose contact with the people that we're helping. In addition to that, lastly, also I do writing. I try to reflect. I wish I was in an academic position sometimes, but certainly try to reflect on what we're doing, write about it, share what we're doing, and also share insights into how the technology industries are working. Thanks.
Thank you. That's super interesting, especially given today's setting being entirely online, but being able to travel is amazing, and making an impact on communities, not just in the United States, is something that I think is just a really good goal in the long term. Up next, Dr. Nankova, if you could share a little bit as well.
I'm in the Department of Computer Science. My general area is artificial intelligence, so a lot, and specifically kind of automated understanding of language. And when I was starting out, it was a very kind of almost toy examples, but that we could handle. But more and more, the type of kind of automated prediction and understanding of language is getting very, very accurate, and there is more and more push to automate more things. And so I have been getting really interested in kind of, is it really good to automate the stuff that we're automating? And I will give you some examples of the research that we're doing. So for example, I'm working with the School of Nursing, where they're very interested in, they have a program for taking care of people with dementia, and they know that when the nurses that are directly trained at the school, in a randomized control trial, they show amazing results. Kind of the program is very accurate. However, when they kind of try to deploy it more broadly, they no longer have the same results and in being able to help the people with dementia and their caregivers. And so one of the things that the nursing school are very interested in is figuring out whether the nurses and the occupational therapists who are delivering the intervention actually deliver it with fidelity, meaning did they deliver it, like did they cover all of the topics that were needed, and also in the prescribed manner, which kind of there it's supposed to be. And if nothing is done by script, you have to figure out what the problem of the caregiver is and work with their problem. So they're asking, can we record the interactions and figure out automatically whether kind of errors occurred, because we can't listen to everyone. So this is a super interesting problem kind of for me to work on, but kind of even in the past year, what we have found out is obviously to make these predictions, one needs to record the interaction and then run speech recognition. And we have found that speech recognition from the major companies actually works worse for African American people, and also much worse for older people, which is very often both the person with dementia and most often their caregiver is older. So this becomes kind of, even before we get to any automation, can we actually kind of improve speech recognition and make sure that it works equitably for all people who are interacting with it. And then kind of down the line in the automation, we also have these things with kind of stylistic delivery. So kind of, were you friendly? Were you enthusiastic? So kind of figuring out whether it's possible to automate a version of kind of the perception of these qualities that is very specific, say, to white educated women, which is what all of the kind of head nursing staff is, and may not reflect properly, like, for example, what a male occupational therapist would deliver. So it's very interesting, both in kind of figuring out how to do it, but also thinking about kind of, if this technology is deployed, how should it be regulated, and what tests should be passed in order to deploy something to make such judgments in the field.
Thank you. That's super interesting, especially given the way medicine and nursing care has been changing in the past couple of months, given the pandemic. Last but not least, Dr. Udani, if you could share a little bit about your job, that would be amazing.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. This looks like a fascinating topic, and I couldn't agree more that we need more people involved in this space. I think of my job as sort of two separate things that are related. So the first part is sort of a more traditional policy role where I help folks in my team to figure out what should Verizon's position be, or what should we be advocating for a given topic or issue. So that could be anything from AI or privacy, 5G, net neutrality, basically any technical topic you can imagine. We have to sort of figure out what is it that our position should be. Should we be advocating for it? Should we be clarifying it? What should we be doing? So that's sort of the traditional part. But the part that actually I find a lot even more interesting and challenging in some ways is explaining the technology. And so the past few years, I've spent a lot of my time explaining these topics. Again, 5G is sort of the newest and greatest buzzword, and everyone kind of knows the talking points, right? But once you go beyond that, what is that technology? What is the potential impact, good or bad? That's the kind of stuff that I spend a lot of time explaining to everyone, from people outside of Verizon. So think members of Congress, their staff, the different agencies, the FTC, FCC, all the different three-letter words you can imagine. And also inside of Verizon, which might be a little bit of a surprise to some, because in a company as big as Verizon, we have a ton of lawyers, lobbyists, all these different people who are not engineers. And so while they are aware of some of the sort of, again, I call it, the talking point level of these issues, they don't have a deep understanding of this. And so a lot of my time is spent on just helping our folks understand what is it we're doing and how is that going to change and affect what they're doing. So those two are sort of the big things that I do. Happy to have questions and discuss this further.
Thank you so much, Dr. Udani, and all of you for sharing. It's really interesting to see the diversity in what you can do in the public interest tech sector, and I think that we have a well-representative sample here. So our second question is, how did you become involved in your field? And instead of going through everyone, we'd like to just pose it and ask that two of our panelists respond. So whichever one of you has an answer to that right off the bat, feel free to unmute and share.
I've got a weird career path, as Christopher probably knows, so I could jump in for just a minute. I grew up as a traditional engineer. Like as a kid, I used to take apart stuff and, break things and patch them. So I've always wanted to be an engineer, and I spent the first decade of my career in engineering. But what I found out towards the end of the 2010-ish was that what we designed, the networks that we designed, were getting more and more impacted by policy decisions made by people who didn't understand what a network was. And so I started doing some of the analysis and like I said earlier, helping people understand that. And that's kind of what got me pulled into the policy side. Since then I've been doing all of that. So that's the way that I ended up in this space.
That's super interesting, and definitely something that we're trying to highlight in terms of bringing STEM students involved in the policy side, because there's often a disconnect between the understanding of policy and the understanding of the implementations of the technology. If any other speaker has an interesting path or just anything they want to share about this question, that would be amazing.
I'll be happy to say something about the question. So after getting my PhD in philosophy, which is not a tech subject, and starting law school, I became interested in the question of what should be the limits of government involvement with what we call personal life or family life. And so I started thinking about the right to privacy in that connection, because privacy discourse was beginning to be used in that connection in the courts in the United States in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when it was this time period I'm talking about. And then the internet happened, and suddenly privacy started to be not just about things like gay rights or abortion or family education, but also about things like even more things about telephones, computers, the internet, eventually the web, social media, all the way up to where we are right now, algorithms and so forth. So I kind of got swept along because I started off as thinking about privacy conceptually. I was actually, believe it or not, the first philosopher in the United States to write a book about privacy was me. That was in 1988. And I've written 3 philosophy books that are related to privacy, one about privacy and accountability, one about women's privacy, and one about the whole question of to what extent ought the government act aggressively, even paternalistically, to protect our privacy. So I've been really excited about how through an interest in a distinctly legal and humanistic subject, I became more and more interested in the technologies of privacy and surveillance. And that's how I got to be sort of in this space today.
Wow, so that was really interesting hearing from both of you, and definitely very informative coming from an undergraduate. And that's kind of along the lines of where we're going to be asking our next couple of questions, because I feel like a lot of us, obviously I can't speak for everyone on this call, but a lot of us coming from STEM backgrounds are faced with entering the real world in a couple of years. And what is that going to look like given the current pandemic and job market? But we were kind of just wondering how difficult it was to become established in your field. I know Dr. Udani touched on this, coming from engineering background to a policy background, and then specifically if anyone faced any interesting hurdles or challenges to get to where you are. We'd be very interested in hearing that.
I'll go. So yeah, I mean, I feel like this journey started for me as an undergraduate, nothing to do with technology whatsoever. I basically started a not-for-profit organization in Philadelphia when I was an undergrad at Penn. I'm from Philadelphia, so that made things a little easier. And kind of got drawn into doing technology as the internet was becoming more of an important thing for those of us doing basically social work, community organizing, and so on. I don't know. I think it's hard to, I suppose if you just kind of stay into strict engineering, there's definitely like a pretty clear career path of things you can do, but the world is much bigger than that. And I think like I still don't really understand how it is I ended up working on technology matters, to be quite honest. It wasn't necessarily a passion of mine as a child or as an adult, but it just seemed like it was the moment. We started living in a moment, and now we're in another moment where technology just kind of, even as Professor Allen was just saying, it just kind of became a thing you had to deal with. It became a thing you had to interface with personally and professionally. And it was affecting and is affecting people's lives. And that's kind of how I got into it. So I used to work with undocumented immigrants in Philadelphia, helping them get connected to social services. I ended up in Nigeria working for a website that was doing citizen journalism. And from there, the people who I was working with in those different spaces wanted to know how to use technology to further their struggles for human rights and for equitable, to live in an equitable world. And that's kind of how I got drawn into technology. I think my main advice that I would give is stay open. Don't assume that you're going to end up doing what you were training your whole life to do. And be open to different opportunities that are going to come your way. And however your background or your sort of educational formation plays into that, something that you're going to keep with you and is going to help give you perspective on whatever it is you might end up eventually doing.
And I'll add to this, I think in addition to kind of building on top of your experience in education, I think it's pretty important to know what you value rather than being told, because I think the personal values are very different. And so to be really happy, it's very important to know what's important for you. I'm saying this as a person, so I did my undergraduate back in Bulgaria, and there the kind of, you decide pretty much at high school whether you will be doing kind of engineering and technical stuff. And so in a way, when I went to and the university, there's no, like, you only take math and computer science, that's it. And the last 2 years, you have some choice of what math and computer science to take, but then, and I was taking philosophy, and I was studying French, and like my peers thought that I'm like alien, from some other planet, and they're like, why are you doing this? Like, this is totally useless, you're just wasting your time. And I think it was kind of a little bit difficult then to persist, and kind of coming to the US and the education here where you actually do have the broader perspective was very interesting. But I think kind of what I got from that resistance as an undergraduate was the kind of things pay off, because very often the things that I'm kind of finding in my work is it's work in technology, but there is this motive, and really to me what's interesting is to understand how things work. So in technology, unfortunately, even nowadays, after we have had so much talk in the media, there are people who say, just tell me what to implement. Like if you tell me, I'll implement it. I don't care how it would be used, and I probably won't think deeply about exactly how it works. And for me, actually, like the how it works and how it can kind of go wrong or not work properly is of great interest. So a lot of this is my work. And so in a way, I was never taught that this is something to kind of pursue. This was a personal interest. And it has kind of, being strong and saying it's interesting and I'll keep developing it, kind of made a difference. So I'll just add this to the advice.
One, I think you hit on a really good point, Ani, that I came from a similar, very rigid education system where you picked, what your major was going to be, and you were pretty much locked in. And when I came to Penn, I discovered the MNT program, and got a business degree also. And so that's since led me to paths that I could have never imagined. And so the one piece of advice I would have to all of you, even those of you who are seniors at this point, you have a huge variety of coursework you can take at Penn that in many other schools you don't have that option. Pick stuff. Even if you don't think you'll enjoy it, it might end up changing your life in ways that you didn't even think about. So pick something that is outside of your comfort zone. And I think that's the one piece I would say, because that's one of the biggest things I got out of Penn and why I spent so many years there, is just the flexibility, the number of courses you could take, the variety of topics.
And being flexible, I think, is a great advantage to having your undergraduate education be at a place like Penn. When I think about the importance of being willing and able to shift gears, so for me, I have a great career, many multifaceted career, but it was plan C. Plan A was I'm going to be a doctor, and my parents really wanted me to be a doctor, and but I graduated from high school a year early, and I wasn't able to do what my father wanted me to do, which was to join the Army and become an Army doctor. You had to be 18. I was only 17 when I graduated from high school. So I was waiting around to go to medical school. But in the meantime, I fell in love with philosophy and literature, ended up becoming a philosophy major in college and going to graduate school in philosophy. But then when I was not terribly satisfied with the sort of the rigidity and alienation and lack of engagement and lack of real world connection within philosophy, and decided to go to law school, it was a hard thing to do. I'd given up on medicine. I gave up giving up on philosophy. I'm going to law, but law, bingo, that was it for me. That was the thing which really excited me and which really gave me sort of launched me into a career that I'm been extremely satisfied by. So don't be afraid to shift gears, to change, to listen to your parents, but also to, find your own voice and find your own way.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I think that's really good advice to sort of know your values and use those to shape your path along the way and keep an open mind to the unique challenges that the world may bring. So we would like to know also, as an undergraduate, did you participate in any activities that led you to working in the public interest tech sector? I know some of you have expressed that sort of this wasn't available during your undergraduate career. So how did you keep those values that you have, and how did you use that during your undergrad career?
I can say something on that. So I majored in urban studies at Penn as an undergrad. Um, and the reason that I majored in urban studies wasn't out of some passion for urban studies, but just because it gave me the most flexibility to do the things that I wanted to do. It gave me credit for doing stuff in the city that I was interested in doing, working with people. So yeah, I mean, I'm very grateful to that program for the flexibility that it had. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I know I wanted to help people. Some of the other people talking about values. That was what was driving me at the time, you know, as a 21-year-old. And so the urban studies program gave me that flexibility to kind of explore um, different things, and also gave me sort of like a, you know, foundational and kind of intellectual framework by which to understand a lot of what was going on. I also took a year off. So it took me 5 years to finish undergrad because it took a year off in the middle to actually start an organization. And part of my undergrad was actually, I was running an organization and going to school at the same time. And that, I think, is kind of like de facto ended up what I ended up doing for quite a few years. So yeah, I mean, I think definitely take advantage of any opportunities you have at school. And some of those opportunities might be to take a break from school, to do things in the real world. I think that for me was like my main frustration as a student at times was I didn't feel like Dr. Allen was just saying something about that as well. Just sort of feeling frustrated that you weren't involved in things. That really got to me as an undergrad. So I decided to get involved. And I think, generally speaking, in the world, when you start getting involved in doing things, many, many paths start to open. So yeah, I tried to maintain that flexibility as an undergrad and have as much time to do independent study, to get credit for work that wasn't exactly coursework, but that did involve doing things and then sort of reflecting on them and putting them into different frameworks.
My experience was a little bit different in that I was pretty much on campus the whole time, but I was involved in the undergraduate assembly, and also I was an RA in Hill House, not far from your law school. And so I was involved in some of the technology issues. This is back when the internet was new and shiny, and having an email address was a big deal. So that was sort of my angle on it, looking at it from that perspective. How do you educate the incoming freshmen about this technology? Again, this was, back when having a computer in your room was a big deal. So that's the kind of stuff that, started me on that path of interacting with others and doing more than just, building stuff for yourself.
Like you, I was involved in student government, and as an undergrad, that was a very important leadership training for me. And then I also started a speaker series where I had students like yourselves who knew stuff, and we would create courses that we'd offer to the grown-up community in our town. So it was a way of getting students engaging with the community, but also students engaging with professionals in the community and developing their own confidence through offering their expertise to older adults. But I didn't have anything to do with technology really until I took my first teaching job in philosophy, which turned out to be at Carnegie Mellon University, sort of at the dawn of the computer age. We had a computer on campus, a gigantic mainframe computer that took up an entire building. And I was teaching symbolic logic. And so I was encouraged to find ways to sort of combine teaching logic and ethics with the computer. So I found ways to program, sort of logic problems into the computer. And so I would use students could do their homework on the computer in the computer lab and check their proofs and so forth. And that was my first kind of introduction to technology and the fascination, excitement about the early stages. I had one of those portable computers that had the telephone. You put the telephone in the suction cups. Remember those? Anybody remember those? And so like somehow the telephone would talk to the machine, and you had like a dot print matrix, and it would go and that we were so excited about that. That was my first introduction to technology, and I was learning at that time how the humanities and computer science could sort of interact with one another. But I was by that time about 25 years old and already a professor. So it was not in undergrad, but it was, in my early 20s, early to mid 20s.
Right. And so, as I said, in my undergraduate, it's kind of said there's no student organization. I mean, kind of Bulgaria at that time. It was suboptimal unless you just wanted to become really good engineer or kind of know a lot. But I can tell you a little bit about my experience. So last summer, I worked with Cindy Dow from the law school to kind of create some opportunities for teams. So actually, I was approached from Cindy and by Cindy, and she kind of was invited to participate in this competition in Georgetown, which is exactly kind of technology, but applied to kind of a problem that a nonprofit has. And so it was really interesting because kind of we just wanted to choose topics and kind of have teams that we can send to the competition. And over the summer, Cindy and I spoke with maybe 6 different people from 6 different nonprofits. And it was kind of back and forth, kind of what their needs are. And sometimes their needs are kind of not really interesting technologically. And other times their needs are, we can't solve them technologically. So like we spend hours in the summer kind of talking about the various projects. And the idea was that we'll end up with a kind of team that's engineers and students from the law school. And we ended up having 2 teams like this. And it was a very interesting experience. A kind of one group was trying to do kind of online safe lock for homeless people where they can keep their documents and kind of important things so that they can apply for benefits. And obviously there it was super interesting because technically that was not that difficult, but it was very important. How do you deal with all of the privacy stuff? Like you're putting someone's identity online, like what guarantees can you give? And then the other one was a little bit kind of easier, but just people applying for local exemptions, tax exemptions in Philadelphia. And the law apparently is so complicated that people who qualify don't know to apply for them. So actually doing a system where one can, again, just kind of put in their information and get a direct link to all of the programs they qualify for. And again, it kind of, technically this was not necessarily difficult, but kind of you're asking someone to put in the important information online. How do you give guarantees that you will not be collecting and saving and misusing this, or that someone can intercept? So this was a lot of work, but was incredibly rewarding. I was so happy that I got the chance to work with Cindy and the student teams last year.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. That was a really awesome answer to our question. And I think it's illuminated a lot for us about how public interest tech isn't just about your personal career, but how you engage with communities, whether that's local, international, or within the undergraduate student body. Our follow-up question was going to be about advice, but I feel like we've all gotten a lot of advice so far. So we're going to start fielding questions from our Q&A form. The first question that we have from a student is, what advice would you have for aspiring technologists in balancing the desire for technological innovation at all costs and the need to think critically about how our work could impact society, especially at larger tech companies where no one person has clear ownership over a project? How can we maintain accountability for our own actions and that of our coworkers?
I want to respond to part of that question, and the part I want to respond to is if you're someone who cares about the public interest and who believes that sometimes tech companies, say the big social media companies or the big, like the Googles, the Facebooks, et cetera, are not doing the right things. How do you reconcile your ability to, say, profit from working with and collaborate with such companies, and also your public interest values? And so, as a privacy advocate, I have found myself working with some of the top companies in the world as an expert and as a consultant, because I believe that I can positively influence their privacy values, and I can help them to better articulate the privacy concerns that they are or are not addressing in their work for in their product development and so forth. So I think that there is a way. I mean, I think that one shouldn't say, I'm never going to work for such companies. You should work for such companies. You should bring the right values into the company culture. You should try to. You won't always be welcome or always find it to be an easy road to hoe, but I think it's worth it. And sometimes, you know, things get extreme. You have to back away, or you have to whistle blow, even in the most extreme cases. But I think that you know, we shouldn't demonize the companies that are producing the projects. We shouldn't demonize the scientists who are trying to make things work and make things work better. And we shouldn't demonize the humanists and the lawyers who are trying to keep the regulations in front of us and keep the values in front of us.
So again, from my work, I think a lot of the things that I do are technology, and I think one of the aspects in being able to talk about the limitations of your system is thinking about system evaluation, so technology evaluation. So that's a pretty neutral way. It's kind of not taking an ethics stance of this is good or bad, but kind of thinking before deploying how things will break is one way that I think is very productive, because then you can, and it slows things down, but not by much. It's not like saying, oh, this is a task that we should never touch. So it leaves room for technology to develop, but also leaves room for those who actually are interested in the kind of control of it to really think about. So I think this is something that's, there are in particular courses I have been actually proposing doing a course on technology evaluation and what are the questions we should be asking and what are the actual kind of technical ways to ask these questions about system performance.
One thing I would add to that is that a lot of times when a company does something that's perceived to be wrong, it's not necessarily something where they're evil. It's just there might not be a clear understanding of the impact. And to me, that's where the technologist, the engineer has to come in and help people understand it. And that's one of the things that is a little bit difficult to overcome. It's becoming a lot easier now, but when I first started, when I was with in the engineering side of Verizon, and I told my colleagues that I was going to go work on the policy side with the lawyers and the lobbyists, I remember very clearly the first question from them was, why? Right? To Christopher's point earlier, the idea of doing that is sort of somehow beneath engineers in a sense. And that's the part that we need to get over, because if the policy people, the lobbyists, the lawyers don't understand the technology, and we as engineers don't go and help them understand it, and they come up with a bad policy, whose fault is it? Is it their fault or our fault? So I think that's the one thing I would say, don't consider that to be two separate things. You have to be willing to go in and do this, sort of the policy stuff as a technologist.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important that we keep an open mind to asking questions and bringing that technology side into policy that's being created. So we have another Q&A question that's about a piece of advice. And this one is, with college being so expensive, what advice do you have for students trying to change career paths, keeping in mind possible financial constraints?
I think one of I'll defer to some of the other folks, but a lot of the technology-oriented paths don't really require a college degree as a mandatory requirement anymore. And so I would say think outside of your traditional college path when it comes to some of these topics, because it's hard. I mean, and Christopher and others can probably agree on this. It's really hard to stay current in academia with what's going on in sort of the quote-unquote real world. And so you can get a lot of knowledge even without going down the traditional college path, especially when you're talking about after undergrad.
I also would add that partly it's making connections, so you don't necessarily need to learn everything that someone, say, with law degree has learned, but kind of finding a connection where you can work as a team can really give you a way to kind of more naturally and gradually learn a kind of adjacent or even completely new field and make an impact. One of the things that I kind of have been following in the last 2 years was facial recognition, and I have been very impressed by the teams at the University of Washington, where they have made huge impact on kind of law regarding facial recognition, but it kind of started with the technologies and a lot of interaction with the group. And so I think this is one way. So kind of instead of saying I have to learn it all, it could be think about, can you make an alliance or kind of work as a team with people who are willing to actually engage across their discipline.
And as far as the money goes, I mean, keep in mind that a lot of PhD programs are extremely affordable because the university pays, pays the PhD program. You're a teaching fellow or an assistant or and working in a lab, but you don't have to shell out a lot of money to get a PhD at some of the top universities, including at Penn. There are also fellowships, available for graduate study and for masters. I mean, I got a fellowship for 4 years from the Ford Foundation to do some of my graduate work. I got scholarships to help me attend Harvard Law School. So if the good advice you just got about forming teams and self-education doesn't work for you, and you do think you need another degree, don't give up on the possibility there may be scholarships, fellowships, and other support for you out there. Pursue all of those options. I was I meant to mention earlier that I didn't go to medical school, but I was interested in biomedical issues, and I had to teach myself a lot of genetics, biology, and in order to, and how to read medical articles in order to pursue some of my interest in bioethics. So, there is a lot that you can teach yourself, and the ability to teach oneself at a fairly sophisticated level is made easier today by so much information being available online. So, you can say, how can I teach myself law? How can I teach myself biology? You can learn a lot about other disciplines without having to get a formal, degree in those subject matters by simply applying yourself to and following your passions.
I can chime in for whatever it's worth. My first job out of college was, I was paid $8,500 in the early 80s to teach high school for a year. My second job, I worked for the US Senate for $16,000 a year. I went to get 2 graduate degrees, paid for them all myself, racked up a lot of debt, and there was always a way. And we can talk about some of the details, but if you do something you're passionate about and you love, there's usually a way with a little creativity and a little perseverance, you can actually make it all work.
Thank you so much for everyone's responses there. I just want to open it up now to any participants. If you didn't place it in the Q&A, if you want to either type it in the chat or unmute and ask your question, now's a great time. So I'll just give a couple minutes for that.
Well, if no one else has a question, I'm going to ask one. Of all the panelists, what do you wish you knew when you were in college that you learned later?
A very simple one is learn how to present, learn how to communicate well, because if you can't do that, it doesn't matter how good an idea you have, you're not going to get anywhere.
Especially across disciplines. And I think here kind of with the policy and technology, it's not only communicate well, but communicate well across different expertise, which is even harder.
I wish I'd known that it was safe to follow my instincts. I think I worried a lot about making the wrong choices, even though I made a lot of hard choices. The self-confidence which comes from with age, I think is something which I wished I developed at an earlier stage.
Yeah, I'll just add one in to be patient. Things happen in the time that they happen, and you can't always no matter how much you want things to happen, they don't always happen when you want them to. So just stay patient and stay focused.
I think that's key. Right? Don't overplan, because everyone talks about, you know, planning your career path, but a lot of times things happen fortuitously where you don't plan things and it just kind of sort of falls into your lap. And just go down that route. You never know.
Awesome, thank you. I see we have one question that came up in the chat, so I will pose that to you all. Are there any resources you could point to for undergraduate opportunities in public interest tech?
Well, actually, let's go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think one resource, you said you were on sabbatical, but I think your course would be something that I think is a great resource, and I wish I could sit in. I know there was a student, so if you can say whether you were teaching it in spring, and I would recommend that.
Well, I'm going to take a little bit, to duck the question a little bit. So I'm going to say the best way you can find out about more, this is an ongoing program, we're just starting it, is to encourage all of you to get involved at Penn as students. Because we are likely to be working our goal is to work closely with the student organization to coordinate, publicize those types of opportunities. There's some people on the Paideia staff who are working with us. We have meetings scheduled next week to work with career services to develop those opportunities. But our best way to reach students about those opportunities is going to be through Pitt at Penn. And so it's sort of a holding in terms of substance. We don't know yet. We're working on it, but actually we have a meeting scheduled literally next Monday to talk about this more. And so we will do that. But our major way to let you know about those is through this organization. So I encourage you to talk to Kelsey, Sophie, and all the people involved in it. And if this has interested you, I would really encourage you to get involved.